When you talk about suicide and the scope of the problem, over 1 million people a year take their lives. Every time somebody takes his or her life, statistics show that about 25 people attempt it. So that means across our globe, we have 25 million attempts.
Statistics are that about 7 or 8% of students walking through the halls have either thought about suicide or are currently thinking about suicide, within the last 3 months. So it's a pretty large number. You can't walk through a school and not bump into or walk by someone who's been impacted by this issue.
So SAP stands for Student Assistance Program, and then we have Student Assistance Program coordinators. We have them in each of our middle schools and high schools, so one per middle school and high school. Those folks are trained mental health professionals. They're in addition to what you might think of as your school counselor, but they're in addition to that, who the primary role of the Student Assistance Program coordinator is to provide prevention programs and intervention programs. So, programs for everyone to learn about different coping skills, social skills, learn about mental health, learn about the ways that you could get help.
When it comes to suicide has touched me in multiple areas. As a student pastor, if a pastor's doing what a pastor ought to be doing, if you're in the community and you're giving ear to those kids or to those parents, guys, you hear that conversation or you hear that topic come up quite often. And so now it causes us as parents, me and my wife, to even go after our kids, and you're constantly checking in, constantly asking those questions, not just saying, how are you doing, but really genuinely asking that question of how's things going, and then giving time for that year. Suicide, it impacts in many different ways, different areas of people's lives.
Prior to coming to Statesville, I worked for the Durham City Police Department, and I was a homicide investigator. And part of my responsibility was to deliver those death notifications, whether it be suicide or homicide. And those are the roughest things to do, to tell a family member, a parent, or a loved one that you're never going to see this individual again. Suicide comes in so many different ways, because you could see someone and on the outside they look perfectly fine. And I always tell people, I said, you never know where someone's at that day we have to encounter them. They may have had a really terrible week. They may have had to deal with something they've never expected they had to deal with. So meeting someone and understanding and having empathy and sympathy is very important. When a young man has his feelings hurt, he keeps it inside. He doesn't go over to his other male friend and say, man, that really hurt me last night, what happened? There's no ability for him to release that emotion that he has within himself. And that's the challenge that we have, because that young man, all of a sudden it turns into rage, or it turns into anger, or it turns into something else. And it comes out in another way that we shouldn't let it, when it should be just a conversation that we could have with our kids. But we've got to change that mindset about someone asking for help. I think that you're stronger when you raise your hand and you say, I have a problem and I need help, as opposed to someone who sucks it up and just never confronts it. Or you think you can manage it on your own. Because that's what we were taught to do when we were younger.
It is tough. It seems like the males, especially young males or young adults, are often the ones that we see or we investigate more of those deaths, usually. But they are usually the last ones that'll reach out for help. Well, I think in the community, first of all, the community, we have to recognize there is a problem. We have to recognize it's everyday life. It's something that's in the thoughts of our children. Kids today, young adults, and adults in general, are exposed to so many different social media things, so much information coming at them at one time. And I think one of the biggest things we can do is be supportive of prevention efforts just like this, and be compassionate with our people if they do have a problem.
I believe stigma with males is something that's viable, and it's a big issue. Dylan wouldn't tell his friends that he was contemplating or had thoughts of that, because in his mind, Dylan very much cared what other people thought. That would be a sign of weakness. The kids that care about what their friends think are probably the most at risk, because they're not going to confide into their friends about what they're feeling and thinking. And so again, just having that place in school or in the community where these kids can go You know, because you think about the average kid, they're not going to drive up to a community and go tell someone they're feeling suicidal or they feel despondent or hopeless. They're just not going to do that. So we got to brainstorm as a community to figure out how we can make help accessible for all the kids. Because what about the kids that don't drive, or the parents that are so strict that once the kids get home from school, they're not allowed to leave again? You know, so how can we make it accessible in the time that we are influencing them as a community?
Some of the things that we have to do is we have to check on one another. But we have to make sure we keep those open lines of communication, making sure that we're checking on each other. Because growing up, you know, our philosophy, our mental health was suck it up. You'll be all right. Just live with it. You know, be a man or be a strong woman. But that's not the way you solve these problems. These kids nowadays need someone that you can talk to.
But I think that the biggest piece is really doubling down on the focus on relationships between the adults and the kids. Really making sure that the adults are watching. You know, a kid who might normally be sitting next to this group of friends all of a sudden is isolated and sitting over here, you know. Really paying attention to the relationships that a kid has in their life and in their school. You know, has a kid seemed really down and not talkative this week? You know, we really ask our folks that see these kids every day to really pay attention to that and develop that relationship and that rapport with students so that they can, you know, spot times when kids might need a little bit more assistance.
But the most important thing that educators can give students today are relationships, because when a student knows that they're cared for, I don't care if they're a gifted student, an average student, a student that's considered a struggling learner, a relationship with a student is paramount for them to be successful.
We need to talk about it more. We need to use the word more often. We need to get people into counseling more often. We start seeing them being withdrawn or depressed or anxious. We need to normalize it, you know, in some sense, but also say, do we want our quality of life to be better? And we need to say yes to that question. We do want our quality of life to be better. We don't want it to go down a different path. There are resources here. There are people who have literally dedicated their lives to helping for this cause, and they want to help. We want to use those people. We need to do more of that.
I think the gap still is kids telling when someone is unsafe and seeking adult help. I think some kids are afraid to be tattletales or they're betraying their friend. What's still lacking is, you know, positive bystanders when somebody's getting bullied. We still have difficulty with peers standing up for that student. We need to really work more with our youth to support them in supporting others.
So for me, when it comes to a student, I would tell the students that we need to be genuine when it comes to reaching out to individuals. Not just say, like on a Wednesday night, I'll tell the kids, we'll stop on a Wednesday night during our student group and I'll go, okay, look, stop, look around, let's see who's not here. Now you know who's not here. Now it shouldn't just be my job to reach out to these kids. You're their friend. You're the student group. Y'all are the one. So y'all need to be reaching out. But I do believe kids want to see the genuineness in individuals.
First thing, from an SAP's perspective, we're looking for mentors for kids. And you do not have to have a counseling degree or a ministerial degree to work with kids. You just have to have a heart and a willingness to reach out and be there and listen and listen with empathy, understanding their feelings before offering lectures or solutions. Just being a listening ear. Some of the best mentors that I've had working with kids in my efforts as an SAP coordinator are bus drivers and janitors, and sometimes administrators, a lot of times, most of the time, teachers, coaches, ministers in the community, parents of friends of friends, you know, have fulfilled that role, you know. So from the SAP perspective, it's about connecting people together.
But I also think that we must look at training the children, because the kids, particularly teenagers, when I've done focus groups in the school systems from grade 5 to grade 12, the students have told me, I know you say I should talk to my parents or a trusted adult, a counselor or whatever. I may talk to a trusted adult, but I probably am not going to talk to my parents. And the reason I'm not going to talk to my parents is because my parents will take my phone away. And their phone, in their minds, is a lifeline. So we have to look at, who do kids talk to? They talk to their friends. So if we don't train the kids, if we don't train the teenagers on how to talk about this issue with their friends, then we're missing the boat. It's a systemic approach. It's the schools, it's the community, and it's the kids, it's the people. So we need to be sure we cover all the bases. Raising the awareness is what is going to help us reduce the rate of suicide.